4 words. That's all it took to cost Frank Zappa millions. I don't do commercial. What followed was a war against the industry that nearly broke him and changed music history forever. In 1986, Zappa stood alone in a courtroom facing Warner Brothers, a corporate giant 100 times his size with an army of 15 lawyers against his 3. The music industry was about to teach this troublemaker an expensive lesson. Instead, Zappa taught them one. That courtroom battle cost him $500,000 in legal fees, $1.3 million in today's money. Money that came directly from his own pocket. Money that forced him to sell his guitars and cancel studio time. What would drive a successful musician to risk everything? The answer reveals the true price of saying no to an industry built to break rebels. The phone call lasted less than 2 minutes.
Frank, we're dropping you from the label,
the Warner Brothers executive said coldly.
We can't sell your music.
It was February 1982. Warner had just released Zappa's album 6 months earlier. It sold 96,000 copies, respectable for experimental music, but Warner had other plans for their money. Their accountants had run the numbers. Each Zappa album cost $22 to produce while generating only $7 profit per unit. A typical Warner Bros. Rock act sold 500,000 units annually. Zappa's albums averaged just 110,000 sales each. The label could push 3 Billy Joel records in the time it took to market one Zappa album. The breaking point came when Warner asked him to modernize his classic 1960s songs. Zappa's handwritten response on the memo simply read, N.O. 3 months later, Warner terminated his contract. Most artists would have compromised. Zappa did something that shocked the industry. In the late 1970s, Zappa spent nearly his entire life savings, around $250,000, to build his own studio, the Utility Muffin Research Kitchen, in his Hollywood home. But what the label didn't realize was that Zappa wasn't just building a studio, he was building a revolution. Just months after Warner dropped him, his song Valley Girl became a surprise hit, earning $280,000 in royalties.
Valley Girl was done in the crudest possible way. When the record was finished, she said, no, this is a hit, everybody will love it. She was the only one who thought that it was really hot stuff. I said, okay, fine. I've been doing this for almost 20 years, and this is the most successful record that has ever occurred, and the only reason that it's successful is because it's an accident. And
you feel cynical about that at all?
Well, I think that if a person doesn't feel cynical, then they're out of phase with the 20th century. Being cynical is the only way to deal with modern civilization. You can't just swallow it whole.
Same company that claimed they couldn't sell his music watched as he created a hit on his own terms. But was this victory worth the cost? And how would this first battle prepare him for the financial war to come? The royalty statement sat on Frank Zappa's desk for 3 days before he noticed the discrepancy. What the hell is the Old Masters box set? He asked his accountant. Warner Brothers was selling a $150 collector's edition containing 60 of his early recordings without his permission. The box set had sold 25,000 copies, generating millions in revenue. Zappa's share? A check for $8,750. The man who created the music received just 0.2% of the revenue. Warner had spent less than $20,000 reproducing those masters. Their profit margin was over 18,000%, while Zappa received pocket change for his life's work. In 1983, Zappa did something unheard of. He sued Warner Brothers to reclaim control of his masters, all 62 original recordings made between 1966 and 1979. He didn't want higher royalties. He wanted ownership of his art. Warner's response was ruthless. They assembled 15 attorneys against Zappa's 3. Their strategy? Drag out the case until Zappa went broke. Each month drained $28,000 from his finances.
I had to choose between my legal fight and my next album,
Zappa later revealed.
I would like to have you tape record this album off the air because this album is not going to be available in stores because Warner Brothers is trying to ruin my darn career. Warner Brothers does not have the rights to this material, although it was delivered to them, and they refused to pay me for the material. And so I claimed a breach of contract and set out to negotiate with some other record companies. And in several instances, Warner Brothers interfered with those negotiations and spoiled the possibility of releasing this material elsewhere.
Just when it seemed hopeless, Zappa's team found a critical loophole. His original contracts never mentioned digital rights, a concept that didn't exist in the 1960s. Warner was selling his music on CDs, a format not covered in the agreements. In 1987, the court ruled in Zappa's favor. He regained control of his masters, but victory came at a devastating price. Legal bills totaled $504,000. To pay them, he sold vintage equipment and doubled his touring schedule. The battle for his master tapes was won, but a far more powerful adversary was already preparing to attack. The letter arrived on official government stationery. Frank Zappa opened it casually, then froze. The IRS claimed he owed $250,000 in back taxes, nearly his entire annual income. The timing couldn't have been worse. Zappa had just invested heavily in new recording equipment. The tax bill would bankrupt him completely. His accountant discovered something that defied belief. Zappa had actually overpaid by $18,000. The IRS wasn't just mistaken, they were completely wrong. But fighting would require specialized tax attorneys at $300 per hour. A legal battle could cost $100,000 with no guaranteed outcome. Zappa made the painful choice to settle for $150,000, an enormous sum in 1975 that would equal more than $800,000 today. The impact was devastating. Zappa's 1975 tour grossed $420,000. After settling with the IRS and paying expenses, he netted just $60,000, less than his road crew made. To survive, Zappa embarked on what musicians still call the tour from hell. In 1976, he played 142 shows across 11 countries, one show every 2.5 days for an entire year. This punishing schedule meant performing while sick, sleeping on buses, and barely seeing daylight. The desperation showed in a letter Zappa wrote to a friend. Sold 3 guitars and the Mellotron to cover last month's payroll. He was selling his beloved instruments just to pay his band. By 1977, Zappa's net worth had plummeted from $1.2 million to $600,000. Half his life's work gone. With his finances in tatters, most artists would have surrendered to the industry machine. Make commercial music, sign with a major label. Instead, Zappa was about to make his boldest move yet.
Congratulations, Frank. You're finally free.
The champagne bottles popped as Zappa launched his own record label, Barking Pumpkin Records, in 1981. What none of them realized was that this freedom came with a staggering price tag.
If you look at it as an industry providing entertainment for people who need to be entertained, okay, it's doing its job, but I have a different view of music. I think that it has an aesthetic importance that goes beyond chart placement. And the business of music is all about this fake list of who sold what. And the whole idea of selling large numbers of items in order to determine whether or not the item has any quality to it is what's really repulsive about it.
Running an independent label costs significantly more than working with Warner Brothers, often hundreds of thousands of dollars per album. Without corporate backing, every expense hit Zappa's personal bank account. Major labels spent around $150,000 on rock albums. Zappa's independent projects averaged $400,000. His London Symphony Orchestra sessions cost $750,000, but sold just 28,000 copies, a loss of over $500,000 on a single album.
Some music of an unusual or experimental nature did get recorded and did get released. Now look at who the executives were in those companies at those times. Not hip young guys. These were cigar-chomping old guys who looked at the product that came and said, I don't know. Who knows what it is? Record it, stick it out. If it sells, all right. We were better off with those guys than we are now with the supposedly hip young executives, you know, who are making the decisions of what people should see and hear in the marketplace. The young guys are more conservative and more dangerous to the art form than the old guys with the cigars ever were.
Distribution created a nightmare. Without Warner's nationwide network, 40% of his records never even left warehouses. In 1983, a warehouse manager called with disturbing news. 120,000 unsold records were gathering dust. The monthly storage bill, $8,000. He lost the battle for airplay, but what he won would change the industry forever. Between 1981 and 1985, Barking Pumpkin released 12 albums. Only 3 turned profits. Studio albums lost an average of $200,000 each. To stay afloat, Zappa toured relentlessly, playing 110 shows in 1982 alone. By 1985, Zappa had sold vintage guitars and recording equipment, raising $125,000 to cover basic expenses. His tax returns told the grim story. $1.2 million in income, but $1.4 million in expenses. Freedom was bankrupting him. How long could he continue losing $200,000 per year before everything collapsed? This will solve everything, Frank Zappa whispered as he stared at the strange new machine in his studio. In 1984, Zappa bet everything on a revolutionary technology, the Synclavier.
That I'm not even sure how to pronounce it. Can you explain it?
Well, it's a machine called the Synclavier, which is, this is the machine that produced that Grammy Award-winning song, Jazz from Hell.
This cutting-edge music computer promised to replicate any instrument perfectly. The price tag? $500,000, equivalent to 3 years of album profits. Zappa's calculations seemed flawless. By replacing his 12-piece band with the Synclavier, he would save $300,000 per tour. The machine never got sick, never demanded royalties, and never needed hotel rooms. What Zappa couldn't foresee was that his technological salvation would become a financial nightmare. Installing it required rebuilding his studio. Engineers charged $500 per day just to program basic sounds. For his album, Jazz from Hell, Zappa needed 3 specialists for 6 months before recording could begin. The bill? $90,000 just to prepare the machine. When Jazz from Hell was finally released in 1986, critics praised its innovation. The album even won Zappa his only Grammy Award. But commercially, it was a disaster. It sold just 89,000 copies, resulting in a $200,000 loss.
The most painful blow came during the 1987 tour. After spending $500,000 to eliminate his need for live musicians, Zappa discovered audiences hated the Synclavier performances. In a desperate move, he had to hire back his band and bring the Synclavier, doubling his costs instead of reducing them. By 1988, the verdict was clear. Instead of saving $150,000 annually, the Synclavier experiment had cost Zappa $800,000 over 3 years. The technology that was supposed to save his career had pushed him to the brink of financial ruin. As Zappa faced possible bankruptcy, no one could have predicted the stunning twist that would transform his greatest failures into his most valuable assets.
Zappa announced tonight the singer-composer lost his battle with prostate cancer. He was known for elaborate, unconventional songs, often with raunchy lyrics. Frank Zappa became prominent some 26 years ago, leading his band he named the Mothers of Invention.
But he composed some classical pieces as well. More recently, he testified on Capitol Hill against mandatory record labeling. His family was at his side when he passed away yesterday at his home in L.A.
2 weeks before his death in 1993,
Frank Zappa asked his financial advisors a final question.
What's the bottom line?
The answer stunned everyone.
$40 million.
The man who had struggled financially his entire career, who had been dropped by his label, who had fought the IRS and Warner Brothers, who had lost money on album after album, had somehow built a fortune worth $40 million. How was this possible? While his albums rarely turned profits, Zappa had quietly built an empire from unexpected sources. His song, Who Are the Brain Police, once dismissed as unmarketable, earned $600,000 from TV commercials alone, more than most of his albums combined. Publishing rights became his goldmine. As younger bands like Primus and Fish covered his songs, each performance generated royalties. In 1991 alone, these covers brought in $280,000 without Zappa having to play a single note. Merchandise defied industry logic too. His famous mustache and beard logo appeared on over 50 products. Between 1985 and 1993, these items generated $2.1 million in pure profit. But the sweetest victory came from Warner Brothers, the label he had fought for years. After their bitter legal battles, they found themselves licensing his master recordings for compilations. The label that once controlled his music was now paying him to use it. Even the Synclavier, once a financial black hole, became a revenue stream through licensing its unique sounds to other musicians. His business structure proved revolutionary. By creating separate companies for publishing, recording, and merchandise, he built a diversified empire. When album sales faltered, publishing kept him afloat. When touring became too expensive, merchandise filled the gap. In 1992, his publishing company alone made $1.8 million, more than his last 5 albums combined. The music industry had a simple formula: make commercial music, sign with major labels, don't fight the system. Frank Zappa rejected every part of that formula and paid dearly for it.
Don't you like that one a little bit?
No.
No?
No. It's a little bit too, you got that military aroma to it.
Eccentric genius?
Eccentric, yes. Genius, maybe.
Funny guy.
Only to a few.
Here's the question, you'll know exactly what it is, and that is, how does Frank Zappa want to be remembered?
Well, it's not important.
Not important at all.
Mm-mm.
Want to be remembered for the music?
It's not important to even be remembered. I mean, the people who worry about being remembered are guys like Reagan, Bush. These people want to be remembered. And they'll spend a lot of money and do a lot of work to make sure that remembrance is just terrific.
And for Frank Zappa?
I don't care.
Today, 30 years after his death, the verdict is clear. Zappa won. Zappa's once precarious empire now stood as proof that integrity and ownership could build generational wealth. But his true victory extended far beyond his own bank account. By 2000, 35% of major label contracts included master ownership clauses, compared to just 5% in 1980. Prince's battle to own his masters, Taylor Swift's decision to re-record her albums, these fights all followed the path Zappa blazed decades earlier. Today, 62% of professional musicians self-release their music, up from just 18% in 1990. Artists from Radiohead to Chance the Rapper have built multi-million-dollar careers outside the traditional label system, following Zappa's independent blueprint. "The best advice I ever got was from Frank Zappa," said Tom Waits.
He said, own everything you do. They can take everything else away, but they can't take that.
Zappa never compromised his art for commercial success. He sacrificed millions to maintain control of his work. For decades, these principles cost him dearly. Frank Zappa didn't just fight the music industry. He rewrote its rules and made sure artists like Prince, Taylor Swift, and Chance the Rapper had the blueprint to fight back. He paid the price for artistic freedom. And in the end, the system paid him back with interest.